Welcome to the Dreamboat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership. Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Dave Billington, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also director of the Dream Research Institute. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist Laura Payne.
Hello, I'm Laura Payne, and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute. And we're called the Dreamboat because we are recording our podcast overlooking the beautiful canal barges here at Little Venice in London.
We'll be looking at dreams, talking to guest experts, and answering your questions.
Now, let's get on with the episode. Well, the subject of nightmares has come up quite a few times now on the Dreamboat, and we often hear from people who have experienced intense or frightening dreams. Nightmares hold an immense amount of emotional energy, and they can disrupt our sleep and demand our attention in a way that is harder to ignore than any other kind of dreams.
And it's worth saying that if you are experiencing frequent nightmares, and especially if they're disrupting your sleep on a regular basis, it's a really good idea to talk to a professional and find out what's behind those nightmare experiences and those feelings. If you're already in counseling or therapy, make sure to talk about your nightmares. Don't wait to be asked.
Yeah, very good point. Nightmares are linked to trauma and can be a symptom of a number of different kinds of mental health issues. So why are they not talked about more in therapy and mental health care? Well, our guest today is on a mission to demystify the therapeutic dream work and encourage mental health professionals to ask about and understand how to work with nightmares.
Dr. Leslie Ellis has a PhD in clinical psychology and a master's in counseling psychology, and she worked in private practice for over 25 years. She did her doctoral research on treating the trauma-related nightmares of refugees. She is the author of A Clinician's Guide to Dream Therapy, and she trains mental health professionals in dream work and nightmare treatment. And she joins us from Vancouver, Canada. Dr. Ellis, welcome to the Dreamboat.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So I'm wondering if we can just really start from basics for people and get you to tell us, what is a nightmare?
There's different definitions. I think really if it feels like a nightmare, it's a nightmare. But they do have this waking criteria that researchers like to use as a way to differentiate nightmares and bad dreams. So a nightmare is it's a very intensely emotional, dysphoric dream that wakes you up. That is one of the favored definitions, although they also look at where the source of the material for the nightmare might come. So if it's clearly related to a trauma, then it's considered a traumatic nightmare. And if you're not sure what the origin is, then it's a so-called idiopathic nightmare. And really, I think these definitions are mainly for researchers. I think for dreamers, a nightmare it's obvious when you have a nightmare because it has such intensity and it scares you, wakes you up.
Yeah. And what stops people from talking about their nightmares, do you think?
Well, this has actually been studied, and there's a number of things. I think one of the main things is that people that have nightmares, their dream material is often really dark and disturbing, and there's a feeling like of shame or of what are people going to think of me if this is what my dreams are looking like. And if they've always had nightmares, then they may also think that this is just the way dreaming is, and they won't necessarily realize that it's unusually intense. And then even if people do have disturbing nightmares that they want, maybe would prefer to have shift in some way, there's a very low awareness that there's anything you can do with them or about them. And it's just not well understood out there in the world that nightmares are really treatable, and you can change your relationship to your dreams, and your dream life can really shift. And so, I mean, you're right when you introduced me that is one of my missions with this, with my work with dreams, is to try and get the word out among therapists who, I really think should have nightmare treatment as part of their repertoire, and for the general public to understand that if they're having frequent disturbing dreams, it could mean something that really needs attention. And there is a lot you can do.
Yeah, Leslie, nicely put, actually. And we are listened to by a lot of psychotherapists and counselors around the world. So, for their benefit, how do you work with a nightmare, a parasomnia, as they're often labeled?
Yeah, so of course it depends on what kind of a nightmare it is. And so I think they would like the most intense, or the most, the kinds of nightmares that need the most immediate attention are ones that have a direct relationship to a trauma, and that recur, and that disrupt sleep. And especially if they cause despair and hopelessness, because there's a dramatic link between frequent nightmares and suicide risk. And the more nightmares people have, the more dangerous the situation can get. And so there's some, studies that are documented on the way dreams change prior to a suicide attempt. And the nightmares escalate, and the content becomes darker. And so it's really something that I think clinicians, dreamers, should be aware of. And so for those kinds of dreams, I do suggest treating them in therapy. I think that, everybody has nightmares occasionally. I think that they're not always a cause for concern. I want to underscore that it's not always something ominous. But if it's a trauma-related nightmare, one that could potentially flag suicide risk, then I suggest people actually see a professional and talk about their nightmares. And the way I treat them is a method that I developed while I was working on my doctoral thesis. And it has quite a few similarities to imagery rehearsal therapy, which is a very well-studied method of dreaming the dream forward. What I don't like is that, Jung was actually the first person that I know of who suggested taking the dream and carrying it forward. And I got the idea from my Jungian training, and that is essentially a main feature of nightmare treatment. And then there are other kind of methods that surround it. But the central thing is to go into your nightmare at whatever level is tolerable, depending on the person's resilience and their window of tolerance, but letting them re-enter and create a new ending. And this is what I did with my, the refugees that I worked with. I trained therapists to help the person, first of all, get resourced and find resources within the dream if possible, because then if they're dreaming, the resources will be available to them as they're sleeping. And it seems to me, having worked with a lot of nightmares, that the antidote is actually within the dream itself very often. And so I start with just getting, this is a shorthand version, but getting them to feel some sort of support or comfort level, and then imagine the dream forward from that place of resource, so that the continuation of the dream is more likely to be constructive. And then richly imagine it so that it feels like this is really a true experience. And then what I find is that the dream it's never the same after that. I've never encountered someone who's had the same dream after that. And sometimes, they'll tell me that the dream has just stopped happening, which, which I don't think is true. I think the dream might continue, but it continues like what you're doing is you're seeding a place for the nightmare to go. So rather than stopping in the most frightening spot like it has been doing, it has a way forward. And if it's a way forward that doesn't, activate the person's nervous system and get their heart going, they may not wake up from it. And in that case, they won't remember it. So they may be having the dream, but the dream is actually completing and doing its job. And so that's kind of a brief description of how I see it. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of a particular dream from, say, a refugee that you've worked with and how that's changed?
Yes, I have an example from my dissertation. I'm careful to use the ones that that people have agreed to share. And this is one that had quite dramatic results. It was a woman from Congo who was involved. I think most people are involved in some sort of tribal conflict, and her father was quite a figure in that tribal conflict, and she had been literally cornered by some armed men who thought she had incriminating information. And in the dream, she dreams that they think she has incriminating information, and they want her to say something, and she is this classic nervous system response of freezing when you're in the face of lethal danger. So she can't speak, and this is where her nightmare recurs, is this experience of being confronted and unable to speak. And in the dreaming it forward, she stands up and she finds her voice, and she just tells them, I don't know anything, but it feels very empowering to her just to be able to speak. And sort of another iteration of the dream, she has somebody come and rescue her and the children she was in charge of. So, and I think that is what literally happened, because she was a refugee and made her way to Canada. And after that, basically dreaming it forward and finding her voice, she never had that nightmare again. Her nightmares literally stopped. So it doesn't always happen quite so dramatically, but the dream didn't come back.
And I was seeing in some of the writing about your research that sometimes just one intervention or one session would stop the nightmares coming back for people. Is that right? Yeah,
it's amazing to me how effective it can be. And of course, it's not always the case. And sometimes other nightmares will come, or other dreams, or, they'll be like that particular scenario won't return, but there will be something else. But it seems to progress. So I know I worked with this person who had a nightmare pretty much every night. And she got to the point where she just did not want to go to sleep, of course. And it was always in this sort of strange building and being pursued, and we worked with the dream. And then she started to develop superpowers, she called them, where she could fly or she could disappear. And that was, a progression where she was still in this scenario, but she had an escape route. And then over time, what happened is that sometimes she would turn and be able to face her pursuers. And she figured out some things about her own family dynamic that was related to it. And the dreams took another turn where they became more like an adventure movie, more like a chase, like when she was having the dreams, there was an awareness of it, of having options and of understanding, in the sort of different way we understand it when we're in a dream, sort of half understanding, but the fear had been replaced with excitement. And so sometimes that it's a sort of a progression that happens, and it's really nice because you can see that the way the dreams change reflects how well the issues are that they're presenting are being metabolized. And what I do find is that I've never encountered someone who's dreamt the same way after a session. And sometimes, like with the Congolese woman, the nightmares stop, which is, so if it works for people, it works really quickly. It doesn't take very long.
It sounds quite remarkable. Do you see regular themes? Is there often a recurring theme through a lot of nightmares, like being chased, or is there something you've noticed, patterns you've noticed?
Yes. That's why I've done a big article for Dreaming on the link between nightmares and the nervous system, because I do, in my therapy work, I work with the polyvagal theory, which is a theory about the nervous system. It sort of updates our understanding. And so I think a lot about, how our nervous system responds under threat. And I was just looking at the content of nightmares, the typical content, and it doesn't perfectly reflect, but almost perfectly reflects our hierarchy of threat responses. So the being chased is in the fight flight response, it's the flight, or being in an altercation or some kind of argument or fight is also clearly a fight response. And then the freeze response is very common in nightmares as well. And so I think there is a correlation.
I was going to say, how do you typically see freeze response? What type of dreams do people have when they're in freeze?
Like the woman in, from Congo, where she actually gets to a place in her dream where she literally can't move or speak. And so she's frozen in fear. And I mean, I know we're also frozen when we're dreaming. We have a paralysis that happens so we don't act out our dreams. And so I was wondering if the freeze response is related to being immobilized, but it feels like that has a different quality. It doesn't have to be a nightmare. It's just that sluggish quality we feel, I think, when we're trying to move and it feels like we're moving through quicksand or something. I think that is partly when we're dreaming, our attempt to move in our finding that we physically can't, and having that incorporated into our dreams at times. But the frozen in fright is a very different quality. It really does, and maybe they overlap at times. But I think that the difference is the person just really feels that classic frozen in terror and unable to, really do anything in the face of their threat.
You were talking about polyvagal theory, and I know that you're also trained in focusing as a technique, and you've been bringing together focusing and this dream revisitation. And I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that, particularly about why, in your view, is it so important to have that embodied aspect of the experience?
Yeah, I love talking about focusing. Focusing is one of the first modalities I was trained in, and it, before embodiment was a thing, I've been working with really, it's an exquisite way of listening to what the body's take is on any particular situation. And Eugene Gendlin, who was the developer of this, also did a book called Let Your Body Interpret Your Dreams, and talked about focusing in dreams. And so I've taken his methods and really kind of kept working with them, and I've adapted them to nightmares. And my sense of it is that focusing is closer to the language of dreaming, because when we're dreaming, we know our thinking brain, our executive functioning, all that frontal brain stuff is really damped down. We don't actually think clearly. It's why we can't seem to find our airport gate or do math, or because that part of our brain is really not what dreams. It's an embodied, emotional, experiential, visual field that really you can access mostly through that way of being. So focusing really isn't about thinking, figuring it out. It's about feeling your way in. And so it marries perfectly with dream work. And I also love that one of the techniques that Gendlin suggests is finding help in a dream, which is what I was doing with nightmares. Is the first thing you do is you love and appreciate your dream, and you find and embody the resources that are in there. And he said, if you just do that with a dream, that's enough, that you don't need to figure it out. And so it's about, picking up the beautiful felt senses that a dream contains, and letting that, really infuse you. And from there's usually a sense of the situation that the dream might be depicting that feels different and feels like there's a way forward. And it also gives you a chance to try different aspects of the dream. I think lots of times, lots of methods really focus on the dream ego, the avatar of us in the dream, as if that's the central figure. Mm-hmm. And I think we're just that's just one player of many in the dream, and the focusing approach, and sort of I also include Jungian approaches, so it's kind of mixed them together. But the idea of us inhabiting or embodying the different dream elements or figures and feeling into what that's like in our bodies also opens up the dream in incredible ways. Sometimes the real gift from the dream is comes from something peripheral or something that isn't really the dream ego. And so I could talk about it a lot. This is just a kind of a taste of how I've brought focusing in, but I could go on and on.
Yeah, I was thinking, David, hearing Leslie talk about that, it reminds me a lot of what we at the Dream Research Institute call the waking dream technique, and how when you work with clients and students and help them re-enter the dream and embody parts of it. As you say, it's often not the content that is the bit that takes over, but something that feels sort of off ball is actually the real bit that needs to be worked on. And the being able to re-enter the dream in whatever way you use is an incredible, powerful process.
Yes, it is. And what I find is that also for people who don't dream, focusing is a way of having a waking dream that comes from the body, that's very authentic to dreaming. And over time, I've started to notice that, when you re-enter a dream or you invoke a daydream or a dreaming state, that there's always this current of dreaming running through us, that it's always available and it comes through the body. It's when we, like when you're in a sort of flow state, it can feel like a daydream as well, where you're not thinking, but you're absorbed in what you're doing, or you have enough going on, like a run or something like a walk in nature that can keep you from thinking, but let you experience your dreaming self. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does indeed. I was thinking while you were talking of Arnie Mindel's The Dreaming Body process that he's developed again, that, you can take this into other aspects of your life to bring about some profound change. And I think, which obviously with talking about your work with nightmares and people who are refugees, how, that's exactly what is required, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think once you start to relate to your dreams in this way of something that's always a current that's running under the surface and that you can access, and that is also, I want to say, trying to help you metabolize some things that maybe haven't been fully felt. They're not trying to scare you or hurt you, but they're actually trying to help, that it can create an ongoing relationship to your dreaming life that it shifts even your perspective of the so-called nightmares or bad dreams, because they're actually bringing more important messages in a more forceful way, because they're trying to say, pay attention to this. This needs attention. This needs you. This is something you really need to look at. And it's not always as bad as it appears, because nightmares are so melodramatic. Sometimes they add a lot of extreme images, just, I think, to get your attention and to make sure you remember. And so I feel like I had one client for many, many years who, her dream images were almost always really violent, scary, like horror movie kind of things. But she got to be quite comfortable with them, because when we unpacked them and, walked through them that we were talking about, they weren't always about difficult things. They were always illuminating, and she got to befriend them and see, wake up in the morning with even what, you think, oh my gosh, how horrible. She didn't have that reaction after a while. She just go, well, this is a really good one because it's got a lot of blood in it, so it must be very important. And I've sort of stopped. Like I look at dream images and I try to take a step back and not really have any opinion about the valence. Like this is not necessarily good or bad. This is just what the dream is picturing, and the rules of engagement and the moral codes and the images in the dream world. There are just no rules that apply the same way. And so sometimes the most beautiful bucolic scene can have this fear attached to it, and sometimes the scariest image when you describe it is actually not that scary to the dreamer. So I just try to, reserve judgment about whether it's a good or a bad dream. I think they're all good dreams, actually.
Yeah, I love that expression, befriend your dream. I think that's that's a great thing for therapists and counselors to also take on board, to encourage clients to befriend the dream. If nothing else, as you say, it takes the sting out of associations that we have with it being a nightmare, rather than just being a dream that's desperate to be worked with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And it doesn't mean that nightmares are always, benign, or that they're referring to something that's easy. They're really also flagging unresolved trauma, and but then all the more important to really think of them as a nocturnal therapist that's trying to. There really is a lot of evidence that they're helping us metabolize emotion, and then consolidate the memory so that it's not like in post-traumatic stress that can feel like the memory is always current. And I think it's because the dream hasn't been metabolized, and so it doesn't get stored the way a normal memory would. It feels constantly present because the dreaming is not able to kind of do its job. And so when you let it complete, or you can work with the nightmare so that they can metabolize the emotion, then the dream becomes more of a normal dream, and the memory becomes more of a normal memory that might be difficult, but is clearly in the past and doesn't flood you with the emotion. And so until it's like Gendlin said, it's when something isn't fully felt, it stays frozen and it can't shift until you actually experience it. And there are ways to experience difficult memories without being overwhelmed. I think that's one of the beauties of focusing. And there's lots of other methods of working with difficult memories that make it tolerable. So I think, when a memory keeps coming in a dream, it is also trying to help metabolize it. And it does over time. Even if we don't work with a dream, there's some evidence that it will, but if we work with it, we can really help the process along, and people don't have to suffer it for so long.
Yeah, Leslie, thank you. I was thinking perhaps we should, we've got our Dream of the Week slot, so I was wondering whether we go for that. And thank you, Leslie, for bringing a dream or nightmare. I don't know what you're bringing for this particular part of the program for us. So over to you, Leslie.
Yeah, for someone who studies and talks about nightmares a lot, I almost never have nightmares, actually. But I had this dream recently, kind of charmed me. And so it's about I call it Red Fox. And I love foxes. So I dreamt that I was in a house that's very similar to my house, which is kind of in the woods. And there's a lot of people around. I don't know why they're there. That's a bit vague. There's nobody I know. But I go outside to where, like, there's a garage kind of shed area, and I see this beautiful red fox. But he's not like the orangey red of a typical fox. He's more like a deep, like a chestnut horse or an Irish setter, something like a richer, darker red. And he seems quite friendly. So I pick it up and kind of wondering, because it is a wild animal, if I'm going to get bitten. And even though I can feel it like in his body that he's a bit wary, he doesn't bite me. And later I notice that he has a collar on, although he's not a domestic animal. He doesn't belong to anyone. And when I pick him up, it gets much smaller, and I think its color changes, so it becomes more like your typical little orange fox. And that was my dream.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. It's
I
great to
love
know.
it.
Yeah. First of all, just wondering what do you make of it? What do you see in it as being significant for you?
Well, it's interesting because I've had a whole series of dreams now about animals that are like partly wild, but live at the edge of civilization, like so wild, but not. And so many different ones. There's some that are like, one was like almost like a prehistoric cheetah cat. And so it feels like a theme to me that I've sat with a little bit, because I'm, it's like what I've come to is maybe an invitation to connect with my own wild nature, my own desire. Like I've done a lot of wilderness hiking and spent a lot of time out there in the wilderness, and I feel very at home out there. And so there's some, and I really haven't done much of that lately, and so I feel like there's this calling to get out there in the wilderness, but also that there's this way of that we as humans could be considered, partly domesticated, partly wild, but that we've lost touch with our wild nature. And there's something about that feels really compelling to me. So that's mainly what I've made of it so far.
I'm quite tempted to take a bit of a Jungian approach and say, well, are there any specific associations for you with the fox? Or a fox?
Yes. I have had this fantasy of having a pet fox, and I've looked at the ones that they have, these people, I think it's in Russia, where they breed these beautiful foxes. I've seen pictures of them. And I don't really believe in domesticating wild animals, so I've kind of torn about it, but I just love them. I just think there's something about them that really captures me. I have, I know about their, the typical wily and trickster connotations of foxes. They're playful and mischievous and kind of have that, that sort of connection. And also, my daughter gave me this. She knows I love foxes, so she gave me this pottery mug with a fox on it. I wish I had it here. I could show you. And so my dog's, was sitting on a chair that was kind of low, and my dog's tail just whacked it off the chair and it broke. And so she actually found another one. It was an original pottery piece, and she found another one and gave it to me for Christmas. So yeah, I have this fox mug.
I love the fact that the dog got rid of its ancestor by picking the fox mug off the
I was
table.
like, not the fox mug. Oh my gosh. And a full, beautiful cup of tea. It was like, great.
There's something here about, as you say, the domesticated self, as in the dog, for instance, if you're going to think of sort of taking a more Jungian reading, and the fox part of you, and how the two are married in some way feels quite important.
Yeah, it kind of, makes sense of the way the image morphs a little bit, because the first time I see the fox is quite a bit bigger, more of a Irish setter crossed with a fox, or something not quite like the typical wild fox, and it's got a collar. So even though it's not really domesticated, and then it starts to turn into more of the typical wild fox. And feeling back into the dream, because this is what I wrote down, it feels to me like there's this tension between that, me wanting to, befriend it, pick it up like I would a pet, and me understanding that that's not its comfort zone, and it's curious, but it doesn't want the collar on. It doesn't want to be held. It's sort of tolerating that. It has come, it's got something to say, or some kind of a message, or some kind of a mission, but it's really not to be cuddled. So it's like trying to cuddle a cat when the cat doesn't want that. It's like, no, that's not what I'm here for. I'll tolerate it, but this is really that's not the point.
Not here to be domesticated. Here to be
No,
wild.
no,
Yeah.
here to tell you to come, back into the woods, or like feel into that, fox nature, or it makes me, as I do go out and for walks in the forest, and we live right at the edge of a big forested area. And sometimes I feel like, I can turn off my thinking mind and really feel into what it's like to be an animal, because we are also animals. And the way that my senses become more alive, if I'm patient with that, is really it's quite tremendous. I don't have really good words for it, but I can say that it feels like there's a sense of aliveness that's not always available, or a sense of picking up on, I think about animals, and they must have so much more information about the world around them than we do, what they can smell and hear. And I don't think that it's beyond our capability, but we've tuned out so much of that. And so there's this invitation to be more sensitive, which I like.
We've got this big noisy cerebral cortex sitting on top of all of our sensory apparatus.
Exactly.
Talking away. And it's really fascinating to hear you speak and talk about your own dream. And I can really get a sense of how you work as you talk about feeling your way into the experience. And the kind of sensate part of that, what is it like to pick up the fox, or what would it be like, and kind of getting into that part of you that is all about sensing and being present in the body, and to the point where it's hard to find words for those experiences. So it's really interesting to see you going through that process just as you're talking about it.
Yeah.
Dave, I was wondering what you made of the colours as well. I was fascinated by this lovely, rich red blood. It felt quite colour. It felt quite alchemical. I was just wondering what Dave made of that.
Yeah, well, again, it just the kind of parallels of what Leslie was already talking about. That there's a desire to be out in nature, and in that beautiful earthy environment, and that's a very earthy color. That's a very primal color, not only of blood, but of the earth and the origin of our species. So there's something very attractive there about the wild. And I was thinking about that. On one level, there's almost as the way you described it, Leslie, the kind of Freudian wish fulfillment. Like, I haven't been able to spend as much time in the wilderness, and so here's the dream giving you that. But it's not just that. There's so much more going on about what that means to you, and the part of you, the part of your nature that's drawing you towards. And that it connects you to your daughter, and that she knows you well enough, and is kind enough to replace this mug that was broken. So there's just so many connections and layers in what is, in some ways, just a very simple dream that you were able to tell us in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the notion of rubedo in the alchemical cycle, that something has come to fruition in some way with the dream, or is about to come together. It feels very holistic in many ways, that it's not a process that still is going to happen, but it's a process that is happening and has got a resolution to it.
That does feel true. And I also feel like privileged to be in the company of this fox, because it reminds me of, whenever I'm out in the woods, there's a chance of seeing some incredible creature, but it's rare, and it's a treat when it happens. And sometimes, and this is just a very strange experience I've had throughout my life, is sometimes the animals will come right up to me and, just strangely don't feel afraid of me. And so this fox reminds me of that strange experience I've had with whales, with condors, with water buffalo, with like all kinds of strange creatures that have come to me. And this fox is like that too. And so sometimes I interpret that, and because I haven't really known what to make of that, honestly, it's been strange, is that they're trying to say something that's beyond my own self, that there's something beyond about connecting with the wildness and maybe preserving it. I mean, I love this concept that's taken hold in some places about rewilding and taking great big farms and just letting them go back to their natural state. And, that so much of the earth has been really domesticated, and it's not necessarily good for anybody, including in particular the animals. So it feels like there's a little bit of that, like the fox is like this somewhat larger, more domesticated looking creature that wants to be or moves toward being more like what it was. And not as shiny, not as well fed, but I think more fox-like at the end. And yeah, I mean, this one time, I have to tell you, I was at the water's edge and I had this whale come. It wasn't a whale. It was a harbor porpoise, almost beach itself and turn on its side to look at me, and sat there, for a long time, just kind of staring at me. I was like, what is that? And why are you here? And I haven't been able to make sense of it. It had to actually kind of push itself off to get back into the water. And things like that have happened a lot. So that it happens in my dream reminds me of those things. And there's something coming to me that feels quite important, and still haven't really completely understood, but I've given you some of my thoughts about it, about the wildness.
Thank you. I mean, that feels very sacred, what you said, with animals coming to you. There's something about your almost angelic self that they're trying to connect with, which I really love. Thank you, Leslie, for, giving us some time today. And great pleasure. We'll put in the notes for anybody, obviously, ways of contacting you and reading about your work. And thank you very much for the day, and for sharing your wonderful foxy dream. I should say to people that you have quite foxy coloured hair as well. So I'm intrigued about the shamanic part of this, but for another time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. It feels like it's been too short, but I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, there's as ever, there's so much more that we could talk about, and maybe we'll have a chance again at some point. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time today. And I was just going to say that for people interested in your work, your website is drleslieellis.com. We'll put that in the show notes. And you also have a really very gorgeous Instagram account that's it's got a really lovely look to it, really distinct, and that's at Dreams Demystified on Instagram, and well worth having a look at for people who are interested.
So thank you for demystifying nightmares for us, and sweet dreams, everybody.
That's right. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.